Hey there, this is Empower Radio. Conscious Living, I'm Wendy Garrett. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. Hope you're having a good day. Wanted to switch up and get back into some more esoteric type stuff, some things that actually, you may have done this already yourself, but I wanted to talk to somebody who's had hours of experience and years of perfecting his techniques, and he's teaching, so you can get in on the program too. This is called Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, the book that I have from Graham Nicholls, Radical New Techniques. And Robert Monroe is the one I'm the most familiar with, but then William Buhlman, we've talked to him before, had another way to add to this. People have also done things on lucid dreaming, and this is different. This isn't the same as lucid dreaming. But when you're getting into this type of activity, there are ways to get started, and other ways of, if you don't happen to accidentally experience it, other ways of activating or engaging an OBE. I wanted Graham to share his version because he has some new techniques that he's bringing to the table that I think are also helpful. My own experience has involved assistance from outer sources. My guides threw me out at one point, and so nobody's addressed that yet. I'll bring it up a little bit later, but first, Graham, thank you. I love what you're doing. I like the way that you address this, and you bring all the different approaches. You even talk about the different, in terms of lifestyle, different diet that may help enhance OBEs. So thank you. I'm looking forward to talking with you this hour.
Great. You're welcome.
Okay. When you got started, first out-of-body experience, what was it?
My first out-of-body experience was when I was around 12 years old, and I found myself around 500 meters from where I lived, floating in a vertical position. So it's almost like I was standing in midair, essentially. So very different to a lot of the classic descriptions that you hear of out-of-body experiences. But that was how my first experiences were. I had several like that. I'm not exactly sure how many now. It was a very long time ago, but it was a series of small, very brief experiences like that. And that basically inspired me then to learn to induce the experience for myself. So that was really the beginning of the journey.
See, I didn't think about that. I remember as a kid floating above and going up and knowing I was going there at night to the playground and looking down at the football field with the goalposts and thinking, this is so cool. And then waking up and, well, I've already been there. But I wish I had done a little bit more at that point, but I had other things to experience. So I'm glad you continued your homework.
Sure. Well, I guess if I'd had them during sleep, which I didn't, and my out-of-body experiences virtually never happened during sleep. So I've never associated them with dreaming or dreams or anything like that. So essentially it happened from just simply relaxing in the evening, not even in the nighttime before sleep. So it was something that obviously made me get up and become more aware of, because if it had happened during the night, I think I would have taken it in a slightly different context. But,
and I agree. That's because for me, that was a natural part of sleeping, was going out and visiting places and seeing what was there or checking in on something. The other was, I was 14 when I had my wisdom teeth out, and I was looking. I didn't realize it had been an out-of-body experience until I was talking with my mom afterwards. I described looking at the doctor over his shoulder into my mouth and watching him work with the teeth, and I was mesmerized. And then I realized I couldn't have had that experience if I had remained in the chair. And then the other one was these, just a few. I've had several, but that one was the only one that possibly would have had a drug inducement. The others were all just organic, and the one when you're talking about being that light, that ball of light or that light energy, that was a meditative state. And then when the guides threw me out, I was with two other people present, and I was looking at myself from the corner of the room, but there was nothing else in the room. It was all dark. And I remember those being triggered in just my own personal conscious expansion as you know as the years went on, doing these kinds of things. And so I really like it in your book when you're saying the meds aren't necessary. That really is a whole different kind of experience. I think that's in itself hugely validating for people who are learning to do this and doing it organically without trying to introduce a foreign substance. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, in my case, I made the conscious decision that I didn't want to mix those things into the equation, if you like. I made that decision very early on. So I've never used any substance, including alcohol and tobacco. So my focus has always been on what we can do with our own psychology, how we can use maybe more of the classic processes that go right back in history, like meditation, sensory deprivation, immersion, all these kinds of ideas. If you think about all of the traditions across culture, there's always been this idea of shutting down the senses to some degree, switching off from the environment and becoming more aware of what's going on internally. And then when we can do that, we then gain access to this larger conscious awareness. And I think that's really where the out-of-body experience comes to the fore. So I've explored more the avenues of you might have heard of flotation tanks and things like that. I've used virtual reality. I've developed my own technology, my own sound technology, my own structures, the largest of which was shown at the Science Museum in London. So very large-scale, complex ways of creating a change for anyone. So basically using the gifts that we have from technology and psychology and actually applying that in a way that can give access to these things to anyone, really.
Well, and that's what I like about it, is making it accessible to, you don't have to have a 10-week course. You do have to work, though, on consciously deprogramming that mind, you know, in getting yourself, some people call it meditation, but it's beyond meditation. It's getting out of your own senses of what's going on. And you talk about that with the old, you know, the ping pong balls, put on top of your eyes and get into that state. But then you also go into there are different ways of inducing this process that I think make it a way of saying, I am intending to do this. I am purposely allowing this to happen. And I think that's important too, is this ritual, this routine that people sometimes take for granted that says, I'm setting this up, I'm allowing it, I'm open. And I do, in my own belief, sense that there's another side of this that's helping to assist me when I go through this method. At least those are the things I've experienced. And I'm not sure that that's in your book with these other helpers. You do mention seeing them when you've been in other planes. That I wanted to bring out because those aren't always addressed in different by different teachers of this topic.
Well, I guess the difference with the way I approach things is it's not really about beliefs and it's not really about my own particular experiences per se. I'm interested in what the truth of the experience is and what is most effective to give other people access to that experience. So in a way, my own perspective on it is irrelevant to a point. What's relevant is the methodologies, the things that seem to work, the stuff that can really give access to these states. That's what really fascinates me and interests me in many ways in how we can do this kind of work. So I guess from the beginning, pretty much people were saying to me, how can I do this for myself? How can I reach those kinds of states? So I started to explore methodologies, things, and I realized very quickly, I'm sure people listening who've worked with different techniques that you can read in various books you can come across in online, etc., they will have found that for one person, a particular technique will be very effective, and for another person, it will have no effect whatsoever, and they'll get nowhere with it. So it occurred to me very early on, well, what's happening there? Why does one person have such success with one technique and another person doesn't? And as I outline in the book, it seemed to me that the key is to look at your wider life and to look at the things that that underlie you as an individual. What are your skills? What are the things that can really take you from your normal state of consciousness, your normal state of reality, the patterns that you've learned, the things, the way you do things, and how can you open that up to something else by doing these kinds of practices. So I think that's really where I've wanted to take things, and that's where you mentioned nutrition, the diet side of things. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect is finding the right technique for you as an individual, rather than trying to fit yourself to a technique. Find a technique that works with your own personality, your own natural skills and abilities. So I think that's really how I've been looking at this. And you mentioned the Ganzfeld, the ping pong balls over the eyes approach.
Yes, yeah.
Well, that's really a very mild, simple form of immersion, of creating this disconnect from the senses and the stuff of the everyday world, so that you can connect with those types of altered states that allow the out-of-body experience. So it's a very simple way of reaching that people can do at home. So that's why I put that within the book.
Part of this, when you're getting into this world, it's identifying the I, who am I? For yourself, what have you come to realize in terms of your state, non-being, non-physical, non-corporeal? How do you define that, describe that?
I guess in many ways it's been about letting go of the self, of the I in many ways, and to look at yourself as a wider process, in a way, as a part of a bigger scheme, an interconnected aspect of a whole, if you like. And I think that's really where these kinds of experiences have taken me, because within a particular out-of-body experience, I might connect with a different form of life, an animal, a plant, could be anything around me. Even the buildings have a certain energy in many of the experiences. If that takes place, then that makes me realize that I have that same kind of awareness, that same kind of energy, and I'm a part of that larger system. So it seems to create this greater sense of interconnection and expansion, and it's very much beyond words. You can't really put it into words. I always like the Buddhist philosopher Alan Watts, when he talks about certain concepts, he'll say, "And we shall not give it a name," and he'll hit a gong as he says it, because it's just, you in a Zen sense, you can't put a label on it, you can't define it. And I very much like this idea of the beginner's mind, Shoshen in Buddhist philosophy, this idea that you approach everything as if you're approaching it for the first time, as if you've never encountered it before. So you encounter it with an openness and a willingness to take it for exactly what it is, without your preconceptions and beliefs and the baggage that you bring with it. So I think that's really where I take things.
Oh, I love it. Well, for me, that helps. The beginner's mind is a good way of putting it, because the one time we lose our ability to understand or explore or discover something new is when we think we know the answer. We've already determined what it is before we even start doing the research. It's, this is what it's going to be. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure. And it also creates this, ironically, this greater chance that you're actually wrong or deluded, because the moment that you start saying this is the answer, this is the truth, then the likelihood is that you're going to ignore anything that contradicts that. So in a way, it's the best way to move yourself towards non-truth.
Yeah. When you're doing these experiments and with other people, and they're exploring and discovering things for the first time, it has to be a good feeling, knowing that you've triggered some kind of an illumination. And you're doing some classes coming up. I'm thinking you have to be getting some great feedback.
Yeah, it's amazing when people give you that kind of feedback. I mean, I think the two things that I gain the most from in my work. One is the positive feedback that you get, the people who write and say that, you know, something's changed their lives. You know, that's quite a profound thing to hear, you know, and I hear that regularly throughout my work. So that in itself is enough for the work I do. And I think the other thing that really inspires and keeps me moving forward is the whole gaining more understanding through science and doing research, taking part in experiments, doing the types of out-of-body experiences that have evidence that support that they're actually a real experience, and being able to share that with people to show that these things are verifiable and they are like real, genuine experiences. So I think those two factors are really important in my life, and also they give something to the wider community in terms of giving people the idea that these are real and genuine and also life-changing experiences.
When you've done that, you've managed to touch things. Do you have an example? I'm thinking you touched a fruit or something. It's just my brief memory of that. Are you able to share that?
I'm not sure what you're referring to there, but I've had experiences where I've, for example, looked into the nature of a plant and felt the entire sort of cycle of that plant's life. And I've had that with animals as well. And in terms of verified experiences, I've had experiences where I've been able to go to another location and see something accurately. That's not something that's easy to do, and it's often overemphasized and exaggerated by people. But within the body of experiences I've had over the years, I have been able to do that, and I have had people witness and verify what I said and what I saw, people who were actually present when I had the out-of-body experience. So things like that are a real confirmation of these kinds of experiences.
Well, it's like Robert Monroe when he had his experience. I think the secretary is when she was at a table with somebody else and she wasn't aware of his presence, except that he did pinch her waist. And she remembered at that point, you know, later on when he said, well, didn't you feel me pinch your, you know, she's like, oh my gosh, that was you. So there was a way for him to make something happen in our physical space that gave an indication that yes, indeed, what he did was legit. So that's why I was like, comparing that.
Yeah, that's another type of evidence. There's the emphasis on trying to find some sense of the physical presence, if there is some kind of body or whether it's some kind of expanded consciousness. I'm not sure at this point, but I think that those kinds of experiences suggest that it's some kind of energetic interaction going on some level. So yeah, that's again, I think there's so much more to research. Really, there hasn't been any in-depth research done for a long time on this particular area. So it's something that's really open for so much more exploration and learning, really.
Well, I like the fact that there's a research study that you do mention in the book talking about the subtle body, and that it was agreed after a certain amount of subjects were explored and measured at their death time that there was a loss of weight of 21 grams. And so now that's supposedly what the subtle body weighs. And you say, and I don't believe that either. I don't think that determines that that's how much it weighs or that it has any weight. It's just that that's what was required by the physical body to engage some kind of animation. And that we're trying to solve a problem that still is a little bigger problem than we are equipped to give any kind of I think validation to with numbers. It doesn't, to me, I was so glad you pointed that out, because I think sometimes we want to put a solution and give it some kind of cement value. And I think they've missed the point with that.
Sure. Well, I think that was a really great experiment that they tried to do that. But at the time that they did it, there was just not the level of technology needed to do that experiment, as I pointed out in the book. But the interesting thing is that kind of idea hasn't really been looked at since, and now we have much better technology. So maybe some kind of experiment like that could be done. So these are still open questions, and I think that's why in the book I said, well, I get the impression that it could be some kind of subtle body, but it could also be that we are just part of a larger, more complex form of consciousness that we can gain access to through things like the out-of-body experience. So it might not necessarily need to be in the form of a body. I mean, why would it just be in the form of our physical bodies, really? That seems... When we think about how expansive spiritual experience and these kinds of experiences are, it seems quite limiting to put it that it would have to be a humanoid form of some description. So I think we need to sort of expand our ideas when we look at the subject as well. I think there's a tendency to try and nail things down to be very physical in a way, and I think that it's probably a lot more subtle and a lot more amorphous than that.
I wanted to know if the plant in the room gained energy, or if the volume of the space somehow shifted, if it transferred. I was just kind of curious. It could have done a whole lot of different things. And that was the assumption, was that the 21 Graham differential was the answer. And I thought, that's just another question to me. So, it's just, are there plants present? And all of a sudden they became animated in a different way with light. And well, my reason for that is when people that I've talked to who've experienced this and seen a ball of light or seen sparks flying or visually noticed some kind of change that may not be manifest for every single individual, because we are so unique and our components are specific like snowflakes. I don't think we're all going to have the same experience, or that those of us who are present may all see the same result. And I think it's so completely, wide open as to what these kinds of things are, that we have to have new techniques and new methodologies and new visions for how we can create some kind of experiment that will give us results we don't anticipate. Instead of trying to say, this is what we're going to get, it's like, okay, these are the results. Now, where do we go from here? And with your stuff, it seems to me you are trying to continually come up with unique experiments and unique circumstances that might give different answers. And you yourself, you try to say, I don't know what consciousness is. You're trying to deliberately leave that question unanswered. In my opinion, that's what I developed. That's what I am assuming from the way that you've written this.
Oh, definitely. I to be honest, I'm skeptical anyone knows what consciousness is. I think in many ways, when someone starts claiming they know what it is, I tend to start losing interest in many senses, because I think when we start to make claims that are not substantiated in any way, it becomes quite difficult to really take that seriously. How can we really know? In a scientific context, we don't know. We don't have a direct relationship between brain and mind. There's this the hard problem of consciousness, it's called. This idea of if the brain produces consciousness, how does it produce consciousness? How do you go from something very physical and flesh, etc., that produces this essential experience of self and me in the world? That's a hugely complicated problem which science hasn't even begun to answer yet. The same is true, I think, within the spiritual areas. We tend to divide things up and make it them and us, but I think in many ways it's not about that. It's really that we're all trying to look for the answers to these kinds of questions, and I think probably it's going to come from a bit of both in a way, a bit of looking at the neuroscience, looking at quantum science. I generally feel that the answer to consciousness might well come from quantum biology, which is this idea that the quantum level does affect cell interaction, neurons, these kinds of things within the brain, and that maybe if that is the case, there's various theories that would allow in that context for consciousness to expand beyond the brain, and therefore that we could have these things like out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, different psychical perceptions in many different ways. I think that they're within the realm of science, which means I think they're within the realm of things we can understand and explore. I don't think that they're something other that's completely non-physical that can't be reached, but that could also be something I'm wrong about. These are just ideas that we won't know until we do the experiments and find out.
Well, and I like that. They're ideas. We don't know yet. That's why this area is so fascinating. My own experiences tell me that we have a whole lot to learn about this area, because I've experienced things that are supposedly impossible. And I have an ongoing thing that's impossible. But it's my reality, and that's what I love about it. You can't make my reality go away. I can. You can't. We're talking with Radical New Techniques of Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, Graham Nicholls. More from Graham next. Conscious Living. Conscious Living on Empower Radio. I'm Wendy Garrett. Thank you for tuning in. Graham Nicholls is an out-of-body researcher, out-of-body experience researcher. Maybe I should say that a different way. Because he may be in body when he's experiencing. All of a sudden, it was two different types of researchers. When you're doing this, and you've had these experiences, my own have been extremely unique, and it lets me know that this body is just, for me, kind of a temporary thing when I go back and forth between. But one of them, and I might add some things for you to show other people how to get out of body, but one of them was just being in a car and watching, kind of in between outside the road, there was the hawk was coming and landing on a fence post. And at that point, I shifted from my state of being present and set in my body. I was at that moment, the hawk landed on the fence. I felt myself land and put my talons, I felt myself land on the fence. And then when I realized that I had shifted, I pulled myself quickly back in. But it was like, that was so easy. And yet I have no idea how I managed it. It's just that it's another experience that I'm able and have had to, add to my list of, isn't it amazing the things we can do while we're here? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think in many ways, much of what is possible within the out-of-body experience and these kinds of experiences is really that we work towards these peak moments when things like that can happen. And I think that by doing practice in general, by combining these different practices, we make it more likely that these peak moments will happen more consistently. So in many ways, it's about engineering a life that's more focused on these types of spiritual experiences, and then they tend to start opening up and happening much more frequently as we pay more attention to them, as we put more energy and focus into them. So it's kind of like they don't happen in a vacuum. It's more, the more elements that you add into your life, which goes back to the techniques I was talking about before, that when you bring in looking at your wider life, the stress levels in your life, how many hours a day you're focused on these kinds of subjects, the more that you put all of that attention into what you're doing, the more likely it is that these peak moments will happen more frequently, and you'll start to have more expansive spiritual experiences. So it's really about creating a life that has the focus that you want. I think many of us get so caught up in our day-to-day life of trying to make a living and going out and looking after children or mortgages or whatever it is that you're personally dealing with, that we forget to put the focus on these other aspects as well. And it's not that we have to deny any of those physical things that we have to deal with. It's more that we have to learn a way to integrate all of these factors into our lives. And I think that's where, with my teaching, I tried to look at ways to integrate these things into your life. I found ways over years of working in this area. As I say, I've been doing it since I was 12. So I had my first job with a spiritual teacher, selling books and helping him out when I was 15 years old. So pretty much my whole life has been defined by working in this area. So the more I've worked and the more I've explored these things, the more it's become a balance of integrating it into my life, of having the balance between the things I do every day and the things that I bring in a spiritual context. And that allows for more and more psychical experiences and spiritual experiences.
I guess my question, there's a reason the word is coming to me, samsara. How does that factor into this? Because we all have somehow this connection to a physical manifest state that it's really hard to disengage from when you're doing what you're talking about, going, worrying about the kids, worrying about the bills, worrying about whatever fiction we've devised as our primary role here. Isn't that perpetuating when you're trying to disengage from that it's going to continue because of your past life and your other, I guess, obligations as a spirit being? Or is this off base?
I don't think I'm talking about trying to disengage from it. I actually think the physical might be the pinnacle of our development. I know that's controversial in spiritual circles, but I don't see any reason to demean or look down upon the physical in any way. All I mean is to bring in a balance, is to bring in all of the elements. It's like we wouldn't want to be completely robotic and rational and scientific about everything, and we wouldn't want to be completely poetic and delusional, and we want to find balance in life. I think, at least in my understanding, that the aim is to create this interconnection, this interbalance between the rational side, the everyday, the physical, and also this more emotional, poetic side as well. I think all of those things have a value. And I think the physical is a completely mind-blowing, amazing, fantastic, beyond my imagination level of reality. I don't see any reason to see it as any lesser. And actually, I'm quite anti the ideas within religions and things that put limits on that and try to demean the physical and to reduce the physical in some way. So I think, but what we have to do, I think, within physical life is to embrace the amazing qualities that it has and not just become a slave to slave mentality of religion or slave mentality of working just to make a living. It's about finding the beauty and the positivity and the expansion within all areas of life, spiritual and physical, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, and I agree. I totally. The stuff that I get is you have to be more fully human to be fully divine, and that it means all of this is important. You are a whole being, not just physical or spiritual. This is the beauty of this moment, is that we can explore all of these vantage points and create a bigger awareness, essence, whole. One of the things that you do in the book is you're very good, I think, at identifying that we each have different ways of learning. Some of us are visual, some of us are kinetic. And so when you're outlining in the epilogue, you've got the appendix, you've got the techniques, and you're trying to give each of us a different way for accessing this state intentionally by identifying, okay, you're the intellectual, you're going to have to be more talked into it. I love that. I love that. It's like, okay, talk yourself for half an hour and you eventually you fall into it or out of it.
Sure. Well, I don't want to give the idea that there's only one type of person and there's only sort of one way to do these things. So what I discovered was that people, their different strengths can be used to their advantages. For example, if someone's not very visual, let's say they can't visualize, they really can't do that, they might be really great at sensing and feeling things. They might be really attuned on a feeling level, or they might be really good with sound. They might be a musician. They might really love music. But when they try to visualize, they can't do it. So if you give someone a visualization technique, they're going to get nowhere. and they're going to try for months and months and months, and they won't succeed because they don't have that particular skill. But if I'd given them a technique that works with feeling, which is what I would do, then they're much more likely to be successful. It could be sound. Maybe they'll use my infra-liminal technology, which is sound designed to help draw you to a vibrational state, the early stages of the out-of-body experience. Or maybe if they're very physical, they're into sports and things like that, I might give them the G technique, which is a technique I developed which focuses on your physicality and your physical body. So again, it's all about finding the right recipe for the right person. And that's really what I think separates the work I do from maybe a lot of the other work that's out there. So that's really the key, I think, to how to get to more effective out-of-body experiences and more consistent out-of-body experiences.
And I agree. That's the thing, is that the methodology, this is still so new. Really, this is new for us. We have even you talk about some of the skeptics earlier in the book. You mentioned so and so skeptic and how they had done research maybe 40 years ago, and then by the time their stuff is out in the masses and criticizing the stuff that's out there now, their research is already 15 years out of date. And this stuff changes so fast. It's hard to keep up with all the new technology, the new ideas, the new approaches. And for me, you are changing the dynamic by saying it doesn't have to happen just when you're asleep or trying to go to sleep or putting yourself in bed. You can, and you also, the tandem experiences where you can do this with a partner. You offer new turns on this that maybe somebody had experienced but never shared, and it didn't meet the common criteria of this is how you have an out-of-body experience. So, well, okay, I guess mine isn't right. I still did it, but it isn't the way it's supposed to work. So, oops, I got it wrong. And then they go back and try somebody else's technique because that's the way it's supposed to happen, and it won't work, ever. It's just mind-boggling how we get sucked into that kind of thinking that there's a perfect and right way when there's your way. Your way is the way that works. Each person has to determine your way, their way, my way.
Sure. I think with you mentioned the sleep and the dreaming thing. That's another a big area, because I noticed, especially in recent years, there's been a shift towards defining out-of-body experiences and lucid dreaming very closely. But in my experience, that's never been the case. So again, it's this example of how things can be different and perspectives can be different. But the lucid dreaming method is one way that can work. But if you're not very good at lucid dreaming, then you can do it consciously as well. And unfortunately, if someone comes across an approach where someone says that you have to do it while you're asleep, then that's going to be really frustrating for someone. What it seems to be related to, actually, in that context, is your chronotype, which means whether you're more of a night owl or an early morning person. That seems to relate to whether you're going to be more likely to do it from a conscious state. If you're an early morning person, you'll probably be more of a dreamer or a lucid dreamer on average. It doesn't apply to everyone, but on average, you're going to be more likely to be a dream person if you're a morning person, and you're more likely to be a conscious trance person if you're a night owl type person. So that's really the data that I've collected. And so therefore, by looking at that, by looking at those different types of people, again, you can find the right methodology.
Have you had any experience with avatars, with beings who are very much like us, just not on this plane? Have you had that kind of experience at all?
I have. I guess when you get into those kinds of levels, it becomes very subjective and it's very personal and very hard to put that into a context for other people to appreciate. But yes, I've had experiences of, I guess, entities or patterns of awareness or whatever you want to call them, higher states of consciousness. I really don't know what exactly they are or were, but I think again they're part of that whole process. They seem to be very common. They're in, as you mentioned, Robert Monroe encountered things like that. Mediums all across the world encounter things like that. People, when they have near-death experiences, they encounter guides. So there's there's a feature of nearly all spiritual traditions and traditions that have nothing to do with spirituality. People who are complete atheists, don't believe in anything at all, have a near-death experience, and they still meet some kind of guide. What that means, I don't know, but I think it suggests that there is some factor of other types of beings. And in my out-of-body experiences, there's two particular levels or beings or whatever that I've encountered in those experiences. I've also seen people that seem to have passed on a very powerful experience. Example of that was one where I seemed to be in the low sort of levels of the afterlife, if you like, and I saw a group of people who seemed to have passed very quickly. I later found out that there'd been a plane crash that day, so I tend to feel that it was probably the people that were in that crash. But I saw a large group of people at a distance. It was very classical, afterlife type scenery, lots of light, mist. It was quite cliche, cheesy in a way, but that's exactly how it looked. It had this quality of being otherworldly, the things that we've all learned to think of as otherworldly, and I think there was a real sense of the people, their confusion, but also that they were starting to go through some kind of process, and they were starting to become more aware to something more than themselves, maybe.
Yeah, a transition.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And see, the reason I ask these questions is because I have my own experiences, and they're very difficult to describe to others who haven't had them. And when people are saying, well, it's just another version of you, and I have there's the information I get isn't from any part of me that I have been aware of from the time that I've, been conscious. It gives me information I wouldn't have access to, and my environment shifts around me and things happen around me. So I have a difficult time when I get answers that kind of simulate, well, it's all you and you're just creating this construct to validate whatever belief you have. It's like, well, I didn't have the belief until it happened. I wouldn't have expected someone to appear before me or to kick me out of my body, throw me across the room, and not only that, say this is going to happen, or tell me we're going to induce this certain state, and then I have this incredible, you might call it diksha, there are different words for it, where you become one with all that is, and in that moment of knowing, you realize this body isn't you. You realize, and the only reason I came back was because in my mind, the awareness is that if you stay out too long, you'll have a shift and you can't come back. And then the other one was that I knew I would be there eventually anyway. And it was just this remembering of this greater and grander awareness that we all have access to was necessary for me in that moment to keep me here and continuing to do my exploration of what it's like to be in a physical body. Now, to tell that to anybody else besides you or other people who are experiencing these transcendent experiences is difficult because they'll say that's impossible. It doesn't happen. And I believe by you sharing your story and continuing to expose people to things like the program, the Navigator course that you're going to be doing, gives them the opportunity to prove things to themselves, not anybody else, but as a personal challenge to say, what can I learn? There's more here, and this is a way I might be able to access it. Because when that happens, this reality all of a sudden becomes a small place, and everything out there is like, OMG, wow, what can I learn today? It's fabulous. It's, that's the cool thing. When you do the things like you're doing, you awaken this curiosity that says, wow, what else is there? And those beings that you've experienced on these different planes are real to me. I've experienced that. And to me, that's just another state of awareness and being. But I don't identify that as me.
Sure. Well, I think the thing with the beings as well is I think when you go to those other kinds of levels, where you are in this sort of afterlife type environment, you meet with these beings of light or whatever they might be. I think it seems very fantastical, and like you say, it's very hard to know the reality of them for other people unless they have directly experienced those kinds of things. But then bringing it back more to Earth as well through the out-of-body experience, we can even still confirm the reality of the experience directly here as well. So if we can confirm it here, it does have the suggestion, at least, that what we experience there might have more reality to it as well. For example, just recently I had an out-of-body experience where I was moving over the Arctic Ocean. I was moving over these glaciers, over this completely beautiful, epic landscape of ice and sea and snow. And I came over an island in the far north, basically right up in the Arctic, and I saw a strange building, a black pointed building, which I later discovered was the seed bank that's been put up there, with a bank that contains all of the seeds from basically the whole planet. And it's in an island owned by Norway. I never knew that existed until that experience, but I was able to identify the island and the location because I saw another island not far from it during the same out-of-body experience, where I floated and drifted across this ocean plain and then down over another snow-covered island that was in the form of a boot, but facing the other direction to the classic Italy boot that we kind of all know, that kind of shape of the island or the land. I was able to look it up afterwards and find out that yes, there was that island there, and the other island corresponded to it, and even discover the building that was there. So that's a verification. But then that's just for me personally. But then I've had other experiences where 4 people were in the room while I had the out-of-body experience, and everything I told them was then shown to be accurate. Even a precognitive experience where I saw an attack in Soho, a terrorist attack where there was a bombing in a bar in Soho in London, and I saw it 5 days before it happened during an out-of-body experience with 4 other people in the room, and described everything that was going to happen to them immediately after the out-of-body experience. So that there's no way really that can be dismissed in any normal sense, and there's no way that I could have known it by any other means. So I think that is one of the most powerful experiences for me, and I also think that I don't know of another experience on record that's like it, really.
Well, those are transcendent experiences. I've had my reality shifted by others, and they've given me the timeline. And fortunately, I've had a partner who experienced the same thing with me. And then these things happen, and you think, how does that? It doesn't line up with our linear view of this world and how things are supposed to happen when our time is shifted and things are changed and shown to us in that manner. The thing I want to get into now, you've got classes coming up, the Navigator course. So if you're listening and you want to find out more and learn from Graham Nicholls, this is an extraordinary opportunity. And there are so many ways that you can go once you've learned some other techniques and a different, I think, perspective on how we can expand our awareness. So Graham, share a little bit about what that's about.
Yeah, sure. The Navigator course is a 5-week course. It's all live, so it's an interactive class that's done online. So you can log in from anywhere in the world. If you do miss a class, you can also watch the recordings. So everything is recorded, and you can have access to that for the whole period and beyond. So basically, it's more than 10 hours of learning on the subject at this point, and I'm going to continue to add new features over time, and anyone who signs up for the course now will continue to get the new features as they're added and expanded. But basically, I'll be teaching the methodologies, the personalized system. how to build a profile to find out what kind of person you are and how to utilize that to have out-of-body experiences. I'll be teaching the advanced methods that I've developed for improving the quality of the experience, improving vision, having more experiences, staying out of the body longer, addressing any fears or safety concerns. All of that kind of thing will be covered as well. I'll go into the science. I'll go into the practicality, all the different types of techniques, etc. So it basically covers everything, and there's even dialogues with experts in other areas, like Robert Waggoner, the lucid dream expert. I have a dialogue with him, and Penny Sartori, the expert on near-death experiences, author of Wisdom of the Near-Death Experience. So I bring in both the science, the radical techniques, the other experts on the area, nutrition, how to stay out longer, how to do more, basically the complete thing. So it's a really in-depth course, and like I say, it can be viewed live or as the recordings after the classes are finished.
Okay, so if you're listening, check out GrahamNichols.com, and it's Nicholls, Nicho, 2 L's, S.
That's right. Yeah. And the course starts on May the 3rd. So that's the next course.
Okay. And the other thing too, you've got another book, Avenues of the Human Spirit. That was your first book, and that talks about your more spirituality.
Yeah, that goes a lot more into my own history and the experiences I've had, the spiritual insights that the experiences have given me. So that goes a lot more into all of that side of things as well.
Okay. And see, I should have done a show on that too, but it takes an hour. All right. At least an hour. And so we may have to come back and do that after you've got your other project launched and you have a little more free time. You've got all sorts of wonderful obligations, and I'm glad, because I think you're sharing some information that helps give people a wonderful appreciation of how much we have yet to learn, and that our experiences are extraordinary and unique. And just because somebody hasn't taught it in a course doesn't mean you aren't able to share something that's fantastically inspiring and awesome to other people. And Graham is doing that just by being here. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And I look forward to maybe talking with you again on the bigger picture of the human spirit, if that's possible.
Thank you. And you're very welcome.
So listening to Conscious Living on Empower Radio, you want to connect with me, you're welcome to do that. You can check out empowerradio.com or go to Talking to Nightlights at my blog and sign in and check that out too. In the meantime, whatever you are doing, remember, you are a conscious creator. Everything you do is programming. The things you tune into, the things you choose to do with your life, the thoughts, all of that, you're programming, you're conscious. You are extraordinary. Expand, and you'll know more. Till next time, see ya.